Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's school committee meeting. Daryl, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? You're closest. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we're in a little different format today because we are here to really handle one topic. We want to do a deeper dive on some data we were looking at the last meeting that we didn't have time to give a real good look at, and have a discussion about the views of climate and learning surveys, vocal surveys. So Dr. Clunchy, do you want to preface the data?
After we looked at all of those sheets at our last meeting and realized that there was a lot of data to look at, we knew that, but we wanted you to sift through it anyway. Beth and I took a second run at it, and we put in tonight's package what we felt was pertinent information for you to look at. Remember, this survey is called the Views of Climate and Learning. It's the first administration where they've done an extensive data analysis of the results of the students. It's not compulsory, although we encourage our students to take it. Having said that, we were not aware that they were going to do the data crunch that they did this year. So as we go into next year's survey, we'll be obviously taking a look at some of the things they're focusing on and having conversations with our students in terms of helping them understand what some of the areas that they're asking are really about. This is a first run for many students. And I think one has to also remember that it's one grade in a school configuration. So each grade has unique characteristics to it. And one thing that comes to mind when I was looking at the data again is when it comes to multiple methods of portraying learning through assignments and assessments, some classes may have more flexibility, or grades may have more flexibilities than others because our total class size is a little over 100, 120, 130. When I say that statement, a number of things come to my mind. It's interesting, I mean, the use of varied assessments to measure student learning has been alive and well since the early 2000s. But it's a little bit dichotomous that we're encouraging students and encouraging staff to use multiple measures of achievement. But at the same time, our accountability system in this state is solely based on one size fits all with an accountability exam that students take, which puts pressure on our staff to ensure that our kids don't have to take one assessment. So when we look at ways that we're going to move forward perhaps in that area, I mean, that area is near and dear to me as a superintendent. But I also have to keep in mind that those students in those classrooms are still writing MCAS exams as well. So that does have somewhat of a limiting factor. It's not totally limiting, but I think that's something that needs to be taken into account. When we look at our index scores for this survey, they were strong. And in fact, some of them, when teased out, would put those categories in the top 15% of schools in the state. So we're within the ranges between where most of the schools fell with typical school climates, and we had some scores, as I just said, in areas that represented the top 15% of the schools in the state. The first page that you can see on the screen or on your computer really does do a general overall index assessment, and you can see the various scores and the various strands of what they were trying to measure in this particular survey. So it's broken apart into school climate, engagement, safety, and environment. And then they do an overall bullying score, index of 54. It's interesting because if you remember from our last meeting, our ranges in the various categories were different for grade 5 than they were for grade 8 and 10. But that bullying score is blended in all three schools into one. So this 54 mean because 2 out of the 3 schools have an index range of 41 to 50. So if you're 54, does that mean you're in the top 15% of schools in the state? Or how much does the grade 5 range, which says 52 from 65 is where most of the schools fell, 70% of the schools fell. within that range. So really, what does that score mean when we apply it to the actual index ranges that are shown? So that's a little bit clear. I want to remind you that the crosswalk between CASEL, SEL competencies, safety, and learning, we're well done in this analysis, and there is some good information for us to look at as we move forward. When we tease out or take a look at the actual questions, the format that we brought back this evening, show you the percentage of students in top two categories, and that percent is compared to the state average. But there are some reversal questions there that you would want low percentages for, so you have to make sure you read those questions carefully. And I'm going to stop there, and I'll just open it up for questions from the school committee.
Daryl, want to start down there then?
Yeah, let me, so I marked up the previous copy, so but I think it's got the same, data in it. And what I'd like to maybe think about is, is maybe if we go grade by grade through it, because I think
Sure.
there are some common threads, I think, through it there. And, and I have to probably apologize in advance. I always sort of just pick out the negative scores and talk about those and not recognize the positives. And I don't mean to to do that. I think, looking at, I'll start with grade 5 engagement here. There's a lot of good things in those top first 5 to 7 questions there that are, I think, indicate some really good things happening within the engagement piece here. But then when I look at 9, 10, 11, and 12 there, one, I don't quite know exactly what they're all, necessarily looking for in those, but it sort of strikes me, does that talk about how we are engaging the students relative to those types of things, and are we looking at different strategies on making sure the students feel engaged, which is what I walked away with from those parts of the scores.
Well, what's helpful when we look at this data, this is nothing different than what we look for when we're doing our own measures within our schools. And since it's the grade 5 assessment, I'm going to turn that over to Scott first.
I would say when you look at 9, you talk about 9, 10, 11, and 12 you mentioned?
Yeah.
9 and 11, we beat the state by 10 percentage points on question 9 and 7 percentage points on question 11.
Yeah, so I'm going to start, and say, part of me doesn't care about the comparison to the state. It's really looking at, I think those scores there, I think I started noticing that the mostly untrue starts creeping up, sort of more significantly than some of the others. And, and I just wanted to sort of, is that indicating something that we're sort of observing within the classrooms, or I'm trying to perhaps understand a little bit why students might be feeling that also.
I don't think that. In fact, I've mentioned our 4th grade has more challenges in social emotional areas than 5th grade. I expect these scores to potentially not be as strong for 4th grade. So I think it's very difficult to take those in any way other than a baseline and take a look at how that cohort is doing moving forward. I was pleased with our scores. I'm pleased with our scores in engagement. When you talk about my teachers use my ideas to help my classmates learn, I think that could be potentially confusing for kids. So we compare ourselves against the state. We don't have another elementary school in town with the same grade, and we don't have other grades tested in town. So that's really the only benchmark that we have to take a look at.
I think when you tease this out, if I just look at the questions where, in this group that you gave us that were below state average, if I look at number 10, when I need help, my teachers use my interests to help me learn. That's something that we're going to have to really take a look at in that particular class and see if it's applicable to other classes. are we taking the time with our rigorous curriculum to tap the interests of our students and mesh that with the standards that are set by the state? And we want to capture student interests. I don't think it's very difficult to do that. We just have to make sure that we use the right type of approach and have the resources to do that. I do see that, Darryl, when I go into classrooms. So, when I look at this, we're 4 percentages off the state, and I agree that the state is just a comparison. I would expect to be well above the state and everything. Something that I'm going to ask the administration, in this case Scott, to take a look at and talk to staff about what are you doing, what kind of strategies are you're using in your classrooms to capture students' interests. And it will vary from subject to subject, but there should be opportunities to do that, even with a rigorous curriculum. So that's something I think we need to take a look at as we move forward. Students respect one another. We're above 8174. Of course, we'd like it to be 100%. Again, on that one, I only really take a look at discipline reports when they are more serious offenses or repetitive offenses. I don't get involved in the day-to-day operations of minor infractions. So I'm going to, Scott's going to have to think about that one as he looks at the grade 5 class as a cohort. My teachers use my ideas to help my classmates learn. It's an interesting question,
Right.
and one that I think needs to be posed to our staff. In all fairness to our staff, have they been explicit when they talk about those things with their students? Is it that apparent that if teachers do take the student's idea, do they really realize that is happening? I mean, that for a grade 5 student, I kind of question that. I think if the students had more of an understanding of what that meant and were more cognizant of it, as a staff, I can see those results changing.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying that these are absolute questions. There's just a kind of general trend that popped up. Some of them, I don't quite get where the question may be coming from either, so that's why I'm not overweighting it there. But, it just gives us, I think it does reflect back in terms of the, how we're differentiating instruction, how we're engaging, it is engagement, but I mean, it's their side of it. And if they don't feel that, that's, you might have thought you've adjusted your teaching or whatever to accommodate it, but it's not necessarily received as such.
Right, it's not perceived that way, and that could be for a variety of reasons. I think what we need to do is tag some of those questions and do a deeper dive and try to figure out why those things are happening. It could be something we need to do differently, or it could be as simple as we're not as explicit as perhaps we could be when we're doing those things in our classrooms. It's interesting. I mean, when I look at this survey, I don't have any data as a researcher in terms of how are these questions formed. What's the validity level? What's the reliability level of these questions? I mean, they appear, but somebody with my kind of thought process, I want to know the deeper dive in terms of how this assessment was even made. How were these questions piloted? What was the number? What was the sample that they used to pilot the questions and establish the validity and reliability levels? And that's not disregarding what we see here, but I mean, that's something for me that I would like to see to create greater merit to what we're looking at tonight. Another thing, Darryl, I would like to see, and I'll perhaps suggest this to the state, is we are chunked with similar districts. We have a few similar districts that have similar profiles. I would like to see our comparison to those districts as well as a second benchmark.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a sample of one. I'm not saying we pivot our whole plan on this. It's
more information.
It's information that, we should be using to reflect upon and factoring that in with our other observations within the classrooms and the other pieces there, so. I think I killed my share of this page. So.
Anything else on this page? Do you want to move on to the next page?
On this page, no.
I'll let you read the next page.
Yeah, well, so I agree with Daryl in terms of the percentages. You know, I felt like a percentage tells me, gives me how many kids are feeling this way or about, you know, or, so, you know, I'm interested in the kids in our district, and, you know, just because we're better than the state doesn't necessarily mean we're doing the best we can do, and that we shouldn't be looking for areas to make improvements. So first, I want to congratulate everyone for the majority of the engagement part. Teachers are obviously doing a great job making sure that most kids feel cared for and respected, which is huge. The areas I see as areas of growth are student empowerment and perseverance. You know, there were a couple questions about, you know, not giving up, or, you know, do my teacher, when I get stuck, you know, do they want me to try again? And I do think those are things that have to be explicitly taught, right? That even when you're modeling it and talking about, you know, I mean, you need to, like, no, well, did you try this? Did you try this? Did you try this? You know, before the answer is given. And, you know, I'm sure that's done. Maybe needs to be done more. Maybe it needs to be more explicit when you're doing it. You know, and you know, taking kids' interest in things into account, making sure that they feel ownership over what they're doing. And even, you know, even if we're getting to that in multiple ways, if the kids aren't feeling like it's their work and that it's my interests and I get to choose, and then it's, you know, it's not having the full effect it could. So, you know.
And to go beyond, excuse me, what you're saying, Erica, I mean, these conversations need to happen beyond the grade 5 class. I mean, we have data for one class. What does this mean in grade 3 and 4? And we may find very different results or similar results. But I think those conversations really do need to happen. I mean, this is helpful data. Do I wholeheartedly agree with the wording of every question? You know me well enough. Of course not. But I think the questions were fairly well done. I mean, when we're on this page, the one that sticks out to me, students at school try to stop bullying when they see it happening. Well, if I put 50 adults in the room and somebody was bullying somebody else, I wonder how many adults would actually stand up and risk being involved in a potential confrontation or get hurt. So I would like to see that question perhaps reworded. Something to the effect that if you see bullying at school, do you seek out help to deal with the situation?
Well, and again, I think that's part of that is why looking at individual questions and individual percentages to specific questions is helpful, right? That, you know, just looking at the safety number, right, doesn't tell us, because we, you know, I agree, that question
Different kind of question.
isn't really helpful. You know, some of these really general questions, students at my school get along with each other. Well, in no school ever are all kids going to get along with each other, and right? So, you know, I don't think that's particularly helpful. But overall, I mean,
There's some good questions.
And to look at specific questions and see how those were answered, I think is good information. Are we just sticking to this first page? Or
No, we're-
all of
Well, I think
grade five?
for the moment, I think we're on this
Okay.
one, but we'll.
Yeah, we can move forward.
Okay.
We're on the second page now.
Well, I was still on the first
Oh,
one,
were you?
and I think
Yeah.
Erica was too.
Yeah.
We jumped.
All right, are we
Okay.
ready for the second page?
Well, I just want to make one comment about the first page. I agree wholeheartedly. There are several questions here that I really don't think the vast majority of fifth graders, unless they had been prepared ahead of time to say, this is how we want our classroom to function, that there's any validity to their response. They probably just ticked off an answer because they didn't know what to do. They filled in a bubble. because it's not something that they were consciously thinking about over the course of the year, so the validity of their response has to be taken with a tremendous grain of salt. Maybe if you ask that question at a high school level, where there's more critical thinking skills that have been developed in maturity over time, I might be more willing to consider the validity of the responses. But, you know, I really feel like, in the point you made, Kelly, about we don't even know who came up with these questions and what the thought process was, really gives me pause. So I don't really want, from my perspective, us to turn the ship because we see a couple of numbers here. I think we need to be really conservative. You know, maybe over time, you know, we can start to think about, okay, yeah, we have prepped the classroom to understand this is something they want to be thinking about if we think that's appropriate. But for the moment, you know, and I agree. I think overall, these are numbers that we would like to see. From a baseline perspective, it's a great jumping off point. I think it'll be difficult in some of these numbers to improve dramatically because of the point Erica just made. Like, you know, if we could stay at 87% of students getting along well with each other, that's pretty good.
Pretty
You know, and I don't think we should be killing ourselves to get to 100 because it's unattainable, I think. But that's all I had about that. So yeah, let's go to the safety in grade 5. Erica, why don't you go ahead? You can come back the other way.
Yeah, okay, so to me, the questions that are most valid are the ones that are I statements, right? So when you're making these broad statements like kids at my school get along, or students help each other, or students stop bullying. Well, maybe one student stopped a bully and, 75 kids saw it, right? So 75 kids respond yes to the one incident, right? So, but when they're talking about things that have happened to themselves, I think that data is more valid. And so, things that I'm really happy to see are, I'm happy to be at our school. 84% are happy to be at school, which is great. I would like to see, of course, that higher, but right, everyone has a bad day, and especially if you've just taken an MCAS exam, you might not be happy to be at school that day.
Especially the last one. And I feel safe at our school.
Yeah.
It was a very important question, too.
The one that I wasn't so thrilled to see was that I have been punched or shoved by other students more than once in school or on the playground. Even though it's a small number, 33% is, of kids getting physical on the playground or at school is, I don't like seeing that. So,
And that's somewhat of an easy one to compare to other data. All Scott needs to do is go through his incident reports and take a look at the frequency of that. So
well,
I see
yes,
that as
yes and no, right? Not every kid who gets hit is going to report it.
well,
And shoving,
true.
I think, is, there's context in that. A punch is a punch. But shoving is, I shoved you, but I was kidding around, but the other kid didn't feel that way about it. So that kid's going to say, yeah, I got shoved, I didn't like it. And the other kid's going to be like, well, what's the big deal, dude?
Right, but it
whereas
also
this horse
says
around.
more
No.
than once. It's
Right,
not
no,
like
exactly, that's what I mean.
Oops.
Like, that's something, but I don't think we're going to see that in an incident report. That, where I'm feeling like that needs to be addressed through the supervision of recess, to make sure that we've got eyes on what's going on around us, so that even if it doesn't look like it was an incident, that the adult who's supervising is going to go up to the kid and say, look, I don't really, I know you were kidding around, but we don't kid around like that, knock it off. We really don't want that to happen. I think we could see that number drop dramatically if we just reinforce that what our expectations are for the supervisors and through them to the kids, and then hopefully that number would go down.
There are multiple factors there. That's true. If we have an adequate number of people supervising, then we should be able to catch most incidents.
I don't think it's just the playground either. It's hallways
Yeah,
between
right,
classes,
exactly, right, right, when
it's,
there's less
or
supervision,
whatever.
right.
So then
Cafeteria.
the next check and balance statement would be our teachers at their doors when kids are coming in from recess or going down to an art class or or a phys ed class, et cetera. Again, as an experienced principal, there are a lot of indicators out there that can verify where we're at with this question. Is it worthy of further investigation? I mean, ideally, we would like to have no kids get questioned shoved. And we can strive for that, but my bigger concern is that we have adequate supervision and that we're on top of these situations.
And then the other question in my mind is, and this goes with 22 and 23. So I've been punched or shoved. Well, a fifth grader would say, yeah, I got shoved, and not even think it was a problem. But the answer is, yes, I got shoved. I got shoved in line. Somebody bumped me. Like, I'm literally answering the question, yes, I was shoved. Was it a problem? Oh, that's a different question. No, it wasn't a problem. You know, the same thing, I got teased or picked on. Well, they're implying that teasing is the same as getting picked on, but it might not be. Kids tease each other all the time. They tease back and forth because they like it in certain settings, in certain contexts. So again, a fifth grader might look at it and go, yeah, I teased Johnny the other day. He laughed because he thought it was funny. He teased me right back. We were having a great time. So we got to be careful with fifth graders, again, about how they are reading this and interpreting what, right. Because what we mean is, were you teased and you didn't like it? Well, that's different than.
Question factually.
Right, exactly.
I know
They're very literal creatures.
It's part of a game, would
Exactly.
shove people.
Right,
They're going very well.
right.
But it's part of the game.
Right. So, again, circling back to that point we were making about the first page, it's just, I think we need to be careful about, how we think fifth graders are responding to this. We might have a different idea when we talk about eighth graders and 10th graders who clearly wouldn't understand. Oh, I know what you mean. Was I teased and didn't like it? No. Or yes, I was. Then that's, that's fine. That context, I think, I trust it more that that's going to be there, than in a fifth grade response.
Scott, what's your take on this?
I agree with what everybody has said. I think that we do have kids having conflict that are still needing to learn how to resolve conflict, that are still working on its citizenship and civility. I think that we live in a society right now where there's adults that also are having trouble with figuring out how to figure out problems in a civil manner, and that's creating even more challenges for our kids. So we have kids with trauma, we have kids who are still trying to figure out how to resolve conflict. Those numbers didn't surprise me. I think our staff is quick to respond. It doesn't mean they can always be preventative, but we're quick to respond. We use a restorative process with kids if there is contact, if there's kids who feel like they were, as Mike said, pushed or shoved or, tripped too hard in football or, in some way a student was aggressive with them, we work with them. But it doesn't surprise me. I think that we have kids struggling, more than they have in the past in my career with how to resolve conflict and, even perspective taking and some of the social thinking things that they need to understand. So those numbers don't surprise me. Those are areas we're working hard on in a number of different ways if we talk about next steps, but it doesn't surprise me that kids are saying, especially fifth graders, hey, listen, there was physical contact at recess. That's not a surprise to me. It's something we're working on. It's a priority for us for sure.
Do you feel you have adequate supervision?
Yeah, depending, yes, but we make adjustments as we need to. We've made adjustments this year in some grades to put additional eyes on unstructured environments. Unstructured environments are tough for kids. So, we try to, with recess, it's one of those things, we try to find a balance between, having people coach kids all the time, which is kind of what happens outside of school, and helping them learn to grow those social skills. Right. But you can't control 125 other human beings, 2 or 3 people that are out there. There could be conflict, it could happen quick. And again, we have lots of kids that are dealing with lots of challenges.
Well, and then the other issue you got to be careful about is if we over-supervise.
Well, that's what I mean.
they've
We
got
try
no
to find a
opportunity
balance,
find
right?
out if they actually learn the lesson.
Well, that's what I mean. We try to find a balance between keeping kids safe, but giving them this opportunity
Yeah, I
to
didn't shove
figure
anybody
stuff
because
out.
I knew I couldn't get away with it. That's not the same as I know I wasn't going to shove anybody because I know it's not the correct thing to do.
Right.
And educationally, unstructured time is important.
Right.
I don't want to,
Right.
I'm not trying to eliminate that in any way, shape, or form. I just, that stood out for me.
Yeah. I think that's reasonable. Stood out for me too. Again, we see a state trend on the way down. So, I think it's a global issue beyond Russell Street and beyond Littleton, but it's certainly something we're continuing to work on for sure.
Any questions
On this page, no, just the one thing that stood out to me was actually the two questions about teasing or picking on, and then we were well below the state average, which is good. But the one question, in my school, older students scare or pick on younger students. I mean, it's minimal, 9% compared to 22% from the state. It's a pretty big difference there. It's just, I think it's goes to show that there is a lot of respect among the students and towards each other and towards the younger grades, which I'm happy to see. And also, they're not transitioning at the same time that they might be. Those incidents can take place. So that's definitely a positive. But I mean, everything is, I think, overall is very good on this page.
No, I mean, we talked about 23 and 24, which is ones I kind of flagged.
So the next page, we're talking about environment for fifth grade.
Yeah, the one that struck me on the environment was one I'd really like to have seen a little bit better was when I am home, I like to learn more about the things we are learning in school.
Yes.
We're always, as a teacher, always trying to teach a love of learning, and sometimes it just doesn't click. I know with my own kids that I've raised.
Clearly in fifth grade, it
Yeah.
doesn't.
At one point, my son had no interest in learning in boat, but then all of a sudden, one day it just clicks, and it's about fifth, sixth grade that happens. That's different for all kids, but I mean, I would obviously like to see that be a higher number, but sometimes it's difficult to put that into reality.
I mean, I think in fifth grade, I think that if we really wanted to make that number jump, I think that there has to be parent outreach, and there's got to be, the ideal would be to fashion some form of curriculum where or a framework that you could send to the parents, like, here's what we're talking about, here are some leading questions to ask your child, or directions to point them in at the library or online, and I know that, the idea that we're going to get, people to conform to that is slim. They're busy, but that's what I mean. Like, for a fifth grader, you're going to have, like, in this day and age, half of them go home and say, wow, what did I do today? Yeah, I'm going to go do more of that. I just don't see it happening unless we get the parents involved, and then they're gently nudging their young ones towards that
Because
goal.
we know this group here was looking forward to this all night, all day. It's like,
Right.
we're going after work tonight to go to the school committee.
I was looking for
If we start teaching Fortnite during the school day, then
Exactly.
The only other thing I would add to that is, when we think about what we do in school, as valuable as it is, in the world we live in, we all around this table probably have taught ourselves a bunch of new things because of the information that's available to us. So it doesn't say kids aren't excited about learning outside of
Right,
school.
right.
It says they might not be excited about doing more long division, but maybe they're teaching themselves a number of other
Right.
coding or
Right.
things that they're excited about. So it's a tricky question. I think it's something we'll definitely talk about. Are we making sure that we're tying what we're doing into student interest? But I teach myself a whole bunch of things outside of work that have nothing to do with work, because it's things that, woodworking or whatever, that is just an interest of mine. So we want to create a love of learning. It might not necessarily for all kids be continuing exactly what we did in school, but it might be a love of learning in other ways. So, but it is.
And I
but-
also think that's another question that is, it's open for interpretation,
Right.
right? So most kids, I think, are going to probably say no to that, but, do they go home and want to read a book?
Right.
Well,
Right.
where did they learn to do that? Do they go home and, they're my son, who will never admit that he likes anything about school, will come home and talk to me about topics that he's learned about, and he'll look up information about them, and I guarantee he would say no to that question, because he's taking one little piece of something he learned at school, and he's learning more information about it, but he's not thinking about, oh yeah, I go home and I want to do more schoolwork. No, that's, so I think that one is kind of hard to.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to monitor this question throughout the years. I'm going to be optimistic on this one and think that with our STEM integration specialist and with an increased focus on project-based learning and interdisciplinary projects, that the addition of this staff member K through 5 may have an effect on that question in terms of students wanting to do other things after school that are related to more than one subject area. Because it's kinesthetic learning, and in my opinion, that may spark further interest. Well, we'll see as time goes on.
What percentage of students will we expect to have a voice in deciding on school rules?
Well, listen, that's an interesting question, because my point to that would be, as a responsive classroom school, every single student, 395 of them, were part of creating classroom rules at the beginning of the year, and then they take the survey in May and say, I have no idea what you're talking about, but that's one of our regular fall transition activities, that in every classroom, kids have a voice and help create the schools, the
So they want
classroom
more.
rules. Well, I'm just saying, I
They
think
want more
it's a
voice.
time issue, because I
You're out.
can
We'll do it
guarantee you
ourselves.
that every student had a voice in creating their classroom rules. So to see that number is a little bit of a chuckle. They may be thinking about maybe like recess rules. Are we allowed to, play touch football or whatever? But responsive classroom is very student-centered around expectations and community. So, I would love to see it say 100, because we include every student. The question is, what was going through their mind in that moment?
That's why I take it out with, I
Yeah.
think it is kind of funny to debate that one, because I
Right.
don't,
Well, yeah, you could flip the other side and go, right,
Exactly.
wish we could do whatever we want,
Yeah,
it's-
exactly. They wrote a book about that.
Right.
Anything else on this one? All right, moving on to grade 8.
You're off the bus.
I like being first.
I could tell. First page, engagement. Is it the chord?
So, I'll start.
Okay.
So the one that kind of struck me a little bit was number 7. Yeah, that was the first one where the mostly untrue percentage jumped pretty significantly from the other ones there on it. I didn't, the big jump on 8, I don't necessarily know if I quite really understand what the question is driving towards there. And then I thought 10 was kind of interesting in terms of about the classroom materials identity.
So you picked out ones I did not pick out on that. But I had, when Jason and I reviewed this,
Yeah.
we were concerned for 8 and 11.
I have a question mark written on 8.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what my question was going to be, but.
I don't, for number 7, adults at our school are respectful of student ideas, even if the ideas expressed are different from their own. That was one you said.
Yeah.
That mostly untrue, 17%. No, I don't know what that's getting at. I think a lot of what we noticed here, just looking at 8 and 11, is, the common thread there is, it sounds like these questions are getting at how much voice do we have in what's happening in our classrooms. And, that falls under the category of engagement for us and what we've really been concentrating on this year. And one of the things that we have really talked about with all of the grade level teams is, the possibility of including something at the end of a unit or an assessment that's just a couple of questions. What was your favorite part of this? What didn't you like about this? What would have made this better? And that's, just 3 quick questions at the end of an assessment that the teachers from the fall all the way through the year can keep that data, say, wow, this class really likes when we do a hands-on activity, or this class really likes when we use, videos or group assignments, whatever it is. And that's really, I think that really gets at those questions. And we're really hoping that that's what the teachers will move towards. And we've had a lot of discussion about those types of things this year. And I think implementing that strategy would get to these questions.
And I think one of the issues around student interest, especially in the 8th grade, it's such a moving target. How do you define what a current student interest is, for a 14-year-old? It changes pretty rapidly, and so when you're trying to plan lessons that meet state curriculum standards, and you're trying to plan lessons that you know are going to be asked in the high school, and trying to prepare kids for certain things, you know, the ability to be able to pivot and say, okay, well, I want you to do this assignment on ancient history, but I want you to do it in a Snapchat format. Those things don't always segue well into a way that is, frankly, you know, authentic for students. And so some of these things, I think, are born out of the idea that we're trying to get kids' skills ready for the next level. And so some of those things, like writing a paper or something maybe traditional like a science experiment, maybe don't fit into that mold as nicely as we would like it to. But I think there's part of that is the sacrifice. Question 10 around the materials. I will tell you, as a lifelong middle school educator, it is so hard to find decent middle school materials, let alone ones that are reflective of gender and race and other things. Like it's the fact that we have what we have is quite remarkable. It really is a constant struggle to find some of those things. So that question I'm not too worried about.
I wasn't necessarily concerned on that one there, and like I said, on 11 and 12, I'm not surprised by that, because, you know, it's kind of a, well, you didn't take my idea, and it's like, well, you also got, maybe your idea really wasn't the right idea either.
Well,
You know,
there's
a whole
that.
bunch of that happens at that age there. What struck me, though, was in contrast to 7, it's really, what was the teacher's reaction to that is maybe more significant to me necessarily than the student feeling that you didn't embrace my idea and move it forward.
Right.
You know.
Well, I think there's part two when you know, the format in which one teacher might gather student information on interests and what they want to see. You know, a student saying this class is terrible, I want you to make it more exciting, isn't really giving a teacher a lot to go on, but it might come out in a survey saying, well, I want you to do this, and sometimes it's not always feasible. So it's a discussion too, and how do we engage students in engaging students who don't have a background in methodology to be able to offer feedback in a way that teachers can use it, you know, appropriately in class.
But I do think, again, you know, that question also is, we have to have some kind of a forum for kids to be able to express their ideas.
Right.
And the more we do that, the more students will feel like they had an opportunity to express what they wanted. I think the more we add that, even in small ways, the better off, you know, we'll see a difference there.
You read my mind, Cheryl. The focus groups we conducted this year certainly was an eye-opener to your guidance counselor, and our kids have a lot of good things to say and well-thought-out ideas that if you give them an opportunity to have those conversations, I think we'd all be a bit surprised. But we do need to create that environment, and the intention of us doing that this year, from my lens as a superintendent, was to have some reflectivity at each school, in particular the middle school and the high school, and start employing these kinds of strategies. I know it takes time, but it's time well spent, so I appreciate you saying that.
You want to go on this one?
No, I'm good on this.
So I flagged some of the same ones, so 8, 11, and 12. Kind of what I said about Russell Street too, that empowerment and choice seem to be common themes that that are lower. And, you know, I completely agree, kids can't choose everything they want to learn. We have state standards we have to follow. But I do think within that, there are areas that, you know, if you're doing ancient Egypt, you know, and you have to, you know, well, do you want to do your presentation on the food? Do you want to do your presentation on the, you know, different jobs they had, or, you know, I mean, I think there's different, or do you want to do a PowerPoint presentation? Do you want to give a speech? Do you want to write a, you know, and not every kid can do the same thing every time, because we got to get up at all those skills. But I think there is different ways to work in some choice
And
that we
was really
have
part of
to.
our push to establish the makerspace as well. So kids
Right.
can go in and make a video, or, you know, make a physical representation of something. And that's
Yeah.
really the beauty of that space, is so when kids go in there, they can do whatever they want to show what they know.
And I think one of the things when it comes to demonstration of knowledge, you know, the idea that you could either offer multiple opportunities within a given unit, multiple demonstrations, or over the course of a year, say, we will provide you, in the course of 10 months, 8 different ways to show your learning, but we're going to do this together where we can have guidance and structure and progress. Those things I can assure you are happening. Maybe there aren't always 5 options in a given unit, but over the course of a year, I can promise you that the students are being exposed to a number of different ways to be able to demonstrate their learning. And then they can take those to the high school, knowing that they have some confidence, that they were able to really invest in them and not just kind of go at it on their own, and I think go to that next level confident in what they're able to do.
The other one I looked at on this page was number 3. Though it is a small number, or it's a big number, I'm looking at the missing 11% of them. I think because of the seriousness of the question, it stood out that, that all students are treated respectfully regardless of race, culture, income, religion, sex, or sexual preference. And not that I think, teachers necessarily or adults necessarily aren't treating kids respectfully, but that their perception is that different kids are treated differently, and that it's based on those things is troubling to me.
And again, as
If-
Scott said, I
if it
would love
is.
that to be, 100%.
If it is, when
No, just the fact that they perceive it is troubling
Well,
to
no,
me.
let me back up here. As adults, we have a tendency to chunk when we read.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying this is fact, but it needs to be part of our conversation here. Some of our students would probably hit the word, adults working at this school treat all students respectfully, and form a concluding remark on that statement. I think it's something that needs to be teased out further, but I wouldn't agree that they're interpreting that question with its full intent.
But
I don't see that.
even if it's respect, it's not quite as drastic as what Erica said, but I
Uh-huh.
still think that is something to consider.
Right. Well, I'm not saying it's not, but
Yeah.
I want, again, my
Right,
job
right,
is
it's
to
not
make
so
sure we
specific.
take things in context.
Mhm.
I was part of the grade 8 focus group, and during those discussions, we didn't ask this question particularly, but we talked about respect, and respect of all people. And that, it didn't seem to, none of that was teased out. Now, granted, we didn't meet with every single grade 8,
Right.
but I just want to be cautious. I'm not disagreeing that this is something we need to look at, but I want to make sure that we understand that even as adults, when we're reading an article, we have a tendency to pick out our own biases when we read in terms of interpreting what we want to interpret.
I just think the question itself is a bit loaded. It's gonna get people, I have a 10-year-old daughter who I know would say that she's been disrespected because of her gender. Because that's just how she thinks. She thinks that she has this attitude that girls can do anything that boys can do, and she should, but she also is highly sensitive to that, so, and it is her perception, but there's only so much you can do about people's perceptions. We can always make it better, but there's always going to be a fraction of the 100% that are going to say that, I feel.
Cheryl, is there anything that you can add to this? Have you noticed anything in terms of that question?
No, I mean, I think that is one that I would like 100%. Like Scott said, I would be
Right.
happy if everybody said yes to that question. I think this is one piece of information, and as you said earlier, it's important to look at all of this data. 89% is a high percentage, but 11% of kids said no on that. So it's still important to go back and look at it and share the information, and if it impacts going forward, if we're able to make a change somewhere and impact a few more kids, then that's important.
Can I just add something to that? I did notice, I tried to cross-reference it with the high school grade 10 data, and the same question was asked, and it's actually, not to take away, it's the same result. I know we'll address that when we get to the high school. Same result in terms of mostly untrue and never true, 10 and 1. And I know just from having been at the high school for 10 years, that some, actually boys will sometimes feel that teachers sometimes favor the girls over the boys in certain situations. I've heard boys say that to me, girls get to do this or that, it's griping, but it is a perception that I've heard from time to time, when, particularly if they happen to land in the principal's office to address a behavior or something like that. And,
I think it has a lot to do with our culture, that we're very hypersensitive to any of these areas. It's all we see in the media these days, and there are going to be people who are going to perceive these things in a certain way regardless. It would be interesting to tease it out and find out some examples of what they're, what they believe is a disrespectful.
It's the sex one at the high school in terms of, gender, I think it would be, some kids feel that there might be a teacher who has a bias against, favors the girls over the boys, and vice versa.
I felt that way in my life also, so I mean, that was 30 years ago.
It'd be a great focus group topic, though.
Middle schoolers tend to look for blame for reasons why something wasn't fair or just or whatever. So I want to include that in part two, to say, well, it's not me. My work was great. The teacher didn't like it because I'm that.
Yeah.
And we hear that a lot as administrators, where it's not my fault that I misbehaved or spoke up or did something, but rather the teacher has a bias against this group. And we see that often enough at the middle school level, that it can't skew it. I'm not saying that that's the reason.
Anecdotally, I think that's the category I mentioned, you talked about, that, is the same at, in high school, but at the middle school. I haven't heard anything anecdotally from students in regards to complaints about the other categories that I mentioned. There's a whole series in the list, almost hinting at discrimination, and that kind of thing.
All right. We're good with engagement. Grading and safety.
I mean, the one thing that sticks out to me on this end, the high school, it's the same question they asked, but because I worry about my grades, it's hard for me to enjoy school. And we deal so much now with social emotional learning, and we're actually well below the state in this area, at least for the middle school. I think that the high school is right where the state is. But it's just an area that I'd like to see us always do better in, just because I think that's such a major concern nowadays. The kids should enjoy school, and they should not feel the pressure that they have to be the best. And that I think that we have to not only show praise for the students who are making National Honor Society, but the kids who are doing well in technical school or technical activities, carpentry, art, whatever other, the musicians, that they have to, those things. We have to really focus on what each students are good at, and so that we can build them up, and so that they can be happy with what their successes are.
And I guess, there's a lot to be interpreted in that question too. Why are they worried about their grades? That's not necessarily school imposed that they're worrying about their grades, right? So, but it's real. So I think we have to, again, take that information and like really bring home to everyone that, I say all the time, and sometimes parents get upset with me, like, it's middle school, it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter. This is where you're supposed to learn. This is where it's okay to make a mistake. This is where you're learning. Like, all of middle school falls under that umbrella of learning. But we do have kids that will be upset about, I got an 80 on this instead of, I thought I had all of the information and I didn't do well on the test. So we still have to be aware of that stress for kids when they say they're worried about their grades. And we haven't had a lot of conversation about that this year.
Academic stress at both the middle school and high school is a serious concern that we have.
That was the one I wanted to start pulling against the risk behavior report, because they also talk about the stress related.
In May, you're going to have a presentation on the results of the focus group meetings that we did in middle school and high school. And we targeted stress and perception of bullying. the stress quickly emerged into academic stress. And as a superintendent, I'm concerned from what I've heard, and there are various potential solutions that I've been discussing with the principals of each school. Everything from monitoring the amount of homework that our students have every night, to the number of tests that we give every day. In the high school, talking about possible schedule changes. Our kids, our students more correctly, have a lot of subjects every day. And years ago, 20 years ago or so, we saw a movement to go away from the traditional 4x4 block schedule in high school, where you would take 4 courses a semester. The advantage of that is that you're decreasing the number of courses that students take, and I thought some people feel that you have an opportunity to do a deeper dive into the curriculum that you're taking. There was some research that was done that stated concerns about the lapse in time between taking one course in the same discipline to another course, and as a result, everybody jumped on the bandwagon to change the schedules. I'm not convinced that in the end the product is as good as it was with a 4x4 schedule, to be honest. And we add to that conversation as we continue our partnerships with different colleges and expand on internship programs. A 4x4 schedule would be much more conducive to having that happen with our juniors and seniors. There's no perfect schedule, but I guess what I'm stating this evening is I'm not sure the schedule that we're using, and many high schools are using a similar schedule, is really doing what it set out to do after over 20 years of implementation.
At the middle school level, how much talk do the students get from the teachers and the other staff about process rather than outcome? About how to prepare to take a test, because in my mind, especially at the middle school level, I mean, we can't kid ourselves. At the high school level, the grades do matter if you're trying to position yourself for as many opportunities as possible in terms of applying to college. You want to have a high GPA. But at the middle school, you're right, it doesn't matter. It's not going to affect, nobody's looking at your middle school transcript to decide where you're going to matriculate in the college. But when I'm coaching or when I'm teaching my own kids, it wasn't about the outcome, it was about the process. Because if you have a good process, the outcome takes care of itself. And you don't have to worry about it as much. And you shouldn't be worrying about it because it will affect your ability to execute on the process. So I'm just curious if we have opportunities to just talk to them about, stop sweating the outcome and what's your process, and let's talk about,
We were just talking with the 6th grade team within the past couple of days about how much of 6th grade goes into that process of, kids don't know how to study. They don't necessarily know how to prepare over multiple days for a test. So, because they haven't been asked really to do it before that. So a lot of, the 6th grade team was talking about how, they'll assign something. The ELA teacher was talking about assigning something over multiple days and saying, you should be concentrating on just 2 words on this day, 2 words on this day, 2 words on this day, and then trying, throughout the course of the year to say, well, how did that work out? Did you do 2 words this day, or did you wait and do 8 words this day? And really to have that conversation. They have to do a lot of that. What is the value of practicing? When you get math homework, how much of it should you, if you feel like you're confident with it, then it's just practice. If you're really not confident with it, then you need to make the teacher aware. That we still have a lot of kids who, they were saying that don't, they study the day before the test, and so there's a conversation about, we talked about having those little bits at the end of the assessment saying, how many days did you spend to study for this? Did you actively study? Did you make flashcards? Did you use any of the electronic methods to study for the test? And they're teaching all of those. They're teaching them how to make flashcards on the computer and all of those types of strategies over time. So they have a lot, there's a lot going on in 7th grade in terms of that. And we also do an executive functioning unit during flex blocks at the beginning of the year, so kids learn to be organized and things like that. So there's a lot of that goes into 6th grade. And then the hope is to maintain it through 7th grade and have a really better understanding of how they are as learners as an 8th grader. But we have lots of conversation about that and how much has to be incorporated because they're learning how to learn still in middle school.
One of the themes that came out of the focus groups that Kelly was talking about was the pressure the kids put on each other when it comes to receiving grades, the pressure they put on themselves to go home with a good grade. So I know for a fact our teachers, we do teach the process, because really that's where it is, learning those study skills and those habits, time management. But at the end of the day, the kids say we're comparing each other's grades. And we want to know how we measure up against each other, and we want to go home and, oh my God, if I get a B on this, I'm going to be in trouble. So there are other pressures that no matter how much we teach the process, are outside of our control.
I also think, as a parent of a middle schooler, that some of them are already thinking, where am I going, what level of class am I going to take when I get to freshman year, so how are my grades going to impact me in that way? I've driven fifth grade boys to a baseball game, and they're arguing or comparing their map scores on tests to see who did better. So I mean, it's just, I think they do put a lot of pressure on themselves. It's just more that we have to be aware of it, and that what are we going to, and to just keep putting that message out there that, it's not all about the grades. It's not all about, this isn't going to, fall.
And then the other thing you want to stress is improvement. If you're improving, even though you didn't get the grade you wanted, if you're improving from the first semester of the last test, then you're on the right track, and
Right.
you should be confident, and you should be proud of yourself, and because again, relaxing is as important a strategy as anything. If you're relaxed, you'll do better. If you're intense, you won't. So trying to give them some coping strategies to just get them to relax, even if they're diluting themselves to a certain degree, that's okay. That's what defense mechanisms are for, when they're used in a healthy manner. So.
And some of the unknown here is what kind of pressures exist in terms of already talking about what colleges we want you to apply for. I mean, that's something that's been alive and well for many, many years. And sometimes I think with the enhanced conversation about different routes to obtain degrees and the cost of degrees, maybe that'll subside a bit. But, I mean, there is a lot of pressure on students, on family beliefs, et cetera, to start preparing to be accepted into a certain university, a couple of universities very early on. I mean, we've had students in our district that it's almost as if they have regular day school, and then they have secondary night school with various academic activities that they go to. And to each their own. I mean, we need to support, and we do support all kinds of explorations beyond the school day. There is a lot of pressure on a large number of our students to not only develop an academic foundation, but to do very, very well. Erica, as a parent of a middle schooler and somebody recently in university, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it comes from all directions, myself included. I mean, my kids come home with a bad grade and they hear it from me, right? I mean, and so I'm not, I'll preface that with, if I think they could have done better, right? I mean, there's a big difference there. Did you put your effort in? Did you? But it's also personality, right? I have one who is laid back, and I
You
have
wish he was
to
more stressed.
exactly. I have to light
I
a
have that
fire
same
under. My one who just went off to college, called me, when she first got there, like hysterical because she had gotten an 81. Okay. And the problem is, and you're right, from other pressures. My youngest is on a club lacrosse team, so, right, she's in 7th grade. Next year, she goes into the high school program, even though it's 8th grade, and they'll start talking to her about recruiting for college, right? I mean, it's insane. It is insane. And, she's not there because, we want her recruited when she's 8. She's there in 8th grade. She loves lacrosse, right? That's her thing. And we have to fight against half of the stuff that they're telling her, on a daily basis, on a regular basis. I think the peer thing is huge. I don't think we can stop it. I do think there are things we can do, right? If we, kids shouldn't be comparing math scores. Like, what? How do they know what their math scores are? Like, are
Comes up at
those?
the end of the test.
Yeah, I mean,
On the screen.
yeah, I just.
And
I
we do
mean,
some
the-
goal setting with kids
yeah.
around here's the areas that you can improve in. So there
Right.
is some like
Yeah.
intrinsic motivation for them with their score, but I know,
Right.
I understand what you're saying, your point's well taken.
Competitive by nature.
Right, and I do, like, if the goal of middle school isn't the grade, it's the process, maybe we need more assignments that don't have a grade. Maybe we need more assignments that are just the process, and then, okay, so, these are, at the end of the process, these are the things you need to work on. How can we do that better the next time, or?
Well, going into 7th grade and then again in 8th grade, the students are recommended for the level of math class that they take. And there's a lot of information that goes into how that is decided. And we have a fair number of parents who override that recommendation. And we accept that override if that's what a parent wants. But oftentimes, we then go back and say, when the student has a C, we didn't recommend them for that level. That's a level that's too hard for that student, and we've tried to make you aware of that at the beginning. So that's, we try to really have a lot of conversation around that and have teachers really explain why they chose that level. But we still have a fair amount in 7 and 8 who override the teacher recommendation for their child to take the higher
And
level.
I think parent input is still a huge thing, and I mean, my parents overrode something for me in high school, and because they knew me, right? They went in and they said, well, she has a C in that class, she's not ready for the next class. And no, it wasn't a C, it was a B something. And my mother said, yeah, and she'll have a B in the higher level class, because that's where I was putting in enough effort, right, to do what was required of me, no more, no less. And I did the same thing at the next level, and, that's information parents have that teachers might not. So I don't,
yeah.
right, I mean, I think schools put pressure on kids, I think parents put pressure on kids, I think outside forces put pressure on kids, I think peers put pressure on kids. So I don't think we can solve it, but I do think there are things that we can do, and
Mitigating strategies.
we all need to be working together to do it.
It's a perfect way of putting mitigating strategies.
It happens at all levels too. My daughter's a senior in high school, and the top 6 or 7 kids in her class, and she'll come home in tears that, one of her friends in an AP class got a 98 and gave her a hard time for getting 102, and I go, you guys are like outside of my realm of understanding right now. Like, everybody has an A+, like, we gotta relax. But at all levels, the competitive nature and/or the anxiety of kids, I think you're right, it comes from a whole bunch of different places, but it's real. And those of us that have kids, we work with kids every day, but those of us who have kids at home get an opportunity to see that, whether it's on the way to baseball or whether it's, I broke down because my friend's mad that I got a 99 and she got a 96. And it's just the pressure around grades and expectations is tough on a lot of kids.
It was interesting during the grade 8 focus group discussion, algebra came up as a topic, and some of the students felt that because there's that separation in middle school, it was a stressor for them, and some of them felt that they weren't as worthy as the others were, and some kids taking algebra were flaunting the fact that they're in algebra. And one of the questions they posed during that focus group was, could we create a pre-algebra or something? But I sometimes think that we have good intentions, but we still start tracking too early. And that bothers me as a superintendent. What are the advantages students taking algebra in grade 8, and what effect does that have long-term in their
Well,
mathematical
and that was,
achievement?
that was one of my questions too, was the stress and talking about, that the grade doesn't matter as much, but in 5th grade, it's decided what 6th grade math they're gonna be in, right? Which decides what 7th, right, and it goes on. So, how much flexibility do we have built in, and are we, because if it's not easy to go from one to the other, then we're making decisions for kids as 5th graders on where they're gonna be in high school. So you kind of have to see a parent's point of like, no, I think my kid can do better than that, and I want them to be able to have the best in the, right? And, if where they are in 5th grade just means that's where they are, or where they are in 6th grade just means that's where they are in 6th grade, and they're gonna be wherever they belong in 7th grade, depending on how, or whatever, but if everything builds on everything else and what you do here, that's a big thing.
And in the end, and I don't have an answer to this, I haven't spent a lot of time looking for research, but does it make a difference in terms of how well students are prepared to enter college? Does it matter if they take algebra in grade 8? And that's something that I don't think has been answered, and maybe something worth exploring. The second part of the conversation is grade 8 too early to track students as to what high school they're going to attend? I am not, believe it or not, being educated in a British system, I am not in favor of tracking at early ages, and I think grade 8 is early. And would we be better off, or would all schools be better off taking a look at choice at the end of grade 9 or the end of grade 10? I just think it's so young for kids to be making those kinds of decisions. And John and I have talked to the Schcmte Tech, and we're creating another entry point at the end of grade 9 or 10 for some of our kids, because by that time, I feel they have a better idea of perhaps what they want to go into. And even that, as Mike knows, I struggle with that, because I feel that technical education should be available for all.
We can do what the Netherlands does. You can be in high school till you're 22 or 23, because you might track into the tech track, but after you're done with that, if you want to go into the, let's call it the business curriculum track, you can. It just means you're going to go to high school for a couple more years. And then if you want to go into the college preparatory track after that, you can. It just means you're going to be in high school for a couple of more years. They don't care. It's not a race. You just, when you get done, when you're done and you think you've gone as far as you want to go, then you go out into the workforce. I don't think we're going to see that here in the United States. That's another way to look at it.
But some vote.
I was going to say, I think, it's an interesting conversation, but I think there's pressures on both sides, right? We can say all you want, but how many parents come in and override the decision? Now, that child might not have signed up for the extra stress, right, that their parents just decided for them. So it's not something you can solve from one perspective here.
You might not want to.
Well, no, exactly. It's a discussion, but I don't think there's a solution or another piece there. There's a lot of factors that
There's
go
lots
into
of factors, yeah.
into that equation, and I'm not sure it can be solved from any one perspective.
No, I don't think it can, but for that one specific example, right, if you probably would have less parents overriding the decision if that one class didn't determine future classes, right?
But-
Or you'd have,
But there's a lot of parents with expectations that they want their child to have that experience earlier, right? And
Right, because either one of the tracks, either one of the, and I'm using tracks slightly, either one of the levels in 7th and 8th still gets the desired outcome at the high school, and that's the information that I always give. You can still get to where, if your desired outcome is to get calculus by the time you graduate, you still can do that. You still can, and lots of students do it. It's not uncommon for kids to double up in a math, taking algebra and geometry at the same time to high school. We know that. So I've gone through the math department chair, Elizabeth Rigo, for years to be able to plan that whole, 6 years out for a seventh grader. So to make that case with parents that even if your child is here, you can rest assured that these are all the possibilities going forward.
But still, I'm sorry. I just think ideally, there's still, it's a lot of pressure for taking 2 maths in a year or 2 sciences, we gotta be aware of them. I think it's a lot more flexibility to move from levels in a history or an English as opposed to a math or a science when we're starting algebra a year earlier, or we're starting, chemistry a year earlier than another student would. I think that's just ideally, but you're right, there are options to these students. Is that the best option? That's what we gotta think about.
And even though we do these things, we're still not at a point where some states are and other countries are, where if students go into an advanced class in middle school, they have the ability to take the final exam for that class in high school, and if they pass it, they get credit and move on to the next course. So sometimes I wonder whether or not we're halfway with the original intention of adding those additional courses in the middle school, because they do not get the added benefit of testing over the next course in most cases. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but there seems to be it's not as smooth as one would think when you really start dissecting what a lot of middle schools are doing in those areas.
I appreciate it. I think we beat this one.
I think we have.
Pretty good. But I don't want to leave safety necessarily. I think all we've talked about so far is the stress, pressure on grades. If there's any other issues that we want to address before we move on.
Well, I just wanted to highlight and say, well done, the 13. If someone saw, if a teacher or another adult sees someone being bullied, they would do something to help, and 95% of kids said yes. So they clearly feel that they can go to their teachers for issues of safety. The one that then surprised me after seeing that was 17, that teachers care about them outside of schoolwork,
And then number 20 on top of that, I feel
Right.
comfortable reaching out.
Right.
And you see where the...
So, I mean, clearly kids feel safe with their teachers. I guess there's a different emotional connection there. And are they feeling like, these teachers are going to keep me safe, but I'm just a student here, right? Or are they feeling like, no, my teachers really care about me? It's still a small, I think those numbers in general are great. I mean, teachers are clearly doing a great job making sure that kids feel safe. The only other thing that I looked at were the I statements are the ones that stick out for me. So, I have been made fun of at 22, and students have spread lies about me, and on social media. If nothing else, I think the social media one is just something that we really need to be aware of. It's becoming such a huge part of these kids' lives. And I say to my kids all the time, when I was in school, we passed notes to each other, and someone threw that note in the trash and it was gone, or threw that note in the fire and it was gone, and you say something on social media and it is there forever, and it's shared to 100 different people, and so being on the receiving end of that is horrific, I'm sure. but also for any of the kids involved, that's just, I don't think they necessarily have the cognitive ability yet to know what that's like and what they're doing and what the consequences of that are. And so
But it's certainly a place, within the middle school, and I'm sure the high school too, where we need to keep educating
Right.
kids. Jason just commented today that as soon as we get caught up, they're on to something different. So, it's a constant, as soon as we have figured out Facebook, no one's on that anymore.
Right.
So, it's something that could be a full-time job, just trying to keep up with that. But it does come up, some years more than others for us, but it's a constant thing that you're addressing with kids that, while this is a wonderful tool, it can be dangerous too.
And questions 17 and 20 specific, especially, but I think 17 might include some of this. When I first read it, I take it to less that I'm comfortable with the adults in the school and more bigger kids, bigger problems. There's no way I'm going to say what's on my mind to an adult because this is so personal. And I am, I am not going to confide this.
Right, it's not a negative comment about the
So
counselor,
yeah.
it's just my own uncomfortableness
Right.
expressing my concern with my, that I
Right.
have to anybody.
And that's what I wonder with question 20, is that more a reflection of just
Well,
middle
and
school
I think it's the
anxiety?
age.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I don't mean anything against
No, I know you
any
didn't.
teachers or,
Right.
or counselors.
Yeah.
But I think because of the age, it's a time that we have to be more vigilant and more reaching out and more, we're here for you and we're, if you need anything, I know being, 13 and 14 and 15 is tough, like, if you need something, or, I know you can't, you got a lot to do. I think, just so kids know, like, okay, it is okay to talk to my teacher, it is okay to talk to, like, I don't know. It's hard for them to know who to go to, I think, in a lot of situations.
And we always
So-
try to make sure that every student has an adult that they will go to and trust, and we map that out every year.
Yeah.
And still, you see the results of that survey, and there are many reasons, but we have to keep plugging away at it.
And the other factor involved is it cool to do it? It's not cool. I have a lot of teachers I could go and talk to, but it's not very cool, and so there's that whole, there's the availability of staff and us, and the guidance counselor and the school psychologist, and the visibility in our building is pretty amazing, I think. So I agree with Jason on that, it's just not a cool thing to do for some kids, or, well, you went to talk to her at the office. So we have to, it's a little bit of a battle around that too, is that, we're available all the time in the cafeteria, in the hallway in the morning. It's not a matter of coming to make an appointment, you can just come and chat with us. So we really work hard on that.
And I think kids are savvy enough to know some of these kids are going through some pretty serious things, and I think they know that if I confide that the adult has to say something. So it's just easier to say nothing. And that's the real hard part of what we do, is how do you get a kid who does not want to tell you anything to confide something, at least to them, that is so personal.
Right.
It's a battle we fight every day.
We're good on safety, all right, on to environment.
So despite the stress that we put them under there, we need to up the challenge of their work.
Right, exactly where I was thinking.
You caught that one too. I just thought that was humorous in terms of looking at it. But I think the two that struck me a little bit here was 34 and 37. I sort of take them together in terms of, again, maybe it's a perception of how the student feels dealt with in these sort of negative situations there.
37, I think, is interesting, even though 39% of the kids said mostly untrue. On our discipline sheet, that if a teacher is filling out a discipline sheet, always it is checked at the top that the teacher has had a discussion with the student, because we don't accept them unless that's happened, because then the student comes down and says, I have no idea what you're talking about, and then you have to send them back. So we, have made a point to staff for years now that that is the very first item of business. If you're going to refer a student for us to speak to them, that you have had to have done that first. So that, I just find that interesting, that if given a chance to explain their behavior when they do something wrong, because it's mandatory that happens.
That's why I say it might be a perception of,
Right.
of that.
Right.
Not saying that you don't, it's.
Right.
And then, like you said, that sort of also struck me when my work's not my best.
Yeah.
Again, usually that's in a negative context in terms of
Yeah.
the things there, and it's how it's being received, not necessarily how it's being, whether it's being done or not.
And some educators have wonderful interpersonal skills and manage to be able to handle that with the rigors of the day-to-day and the 120 kids coming through, and others. When I look at number 37, if you have a student in your class who is a consistent behavior issue, you do get to a point where after a while, you're like, hey, this is the third time this week. You're less likely to want to hear the explanation. So there is part of that, too, to say, okay, considering where this is coming from is a little bit important. Whereas a student, if it's the first time they've ever crossed a line, you're more likely to listen to what's going on that you would cause you to sidestep. And that's a lot of what we deal with. We see some of the same high flyers in our offices, frequent flyer miles coming through, and that it does get to be a little bit difficult from time to time, where you're like, okay, what causes this today? And after a while, it's easy to sort of dismiss that. So we have to be diligent about, being mindful about, listen, these are 13-year-olds, and they're going through things, and we're the adults, and having those conversations from administration all the way down to educators and everybody in between, like just making sure that we take a breath and remember that sometimes these kids need to be heard more than we realize.
I was just going to say with 36 here, so we have about 74% that acknowledge help is available. And so when we compare that with 20 on the previous page, it seems to compare that, like, they know it's available, but they're not going to do it. So I think that does say what you thought.
Welcome to 8th grade.
We're all there.
Out of all these things,
True.
you want none of it.
We're checking going back.
10th grade. Talk about this all. Engagement.
Yeah, the 85% that students respect one another, I think that's very good. And obviously, I'd like to see it higher, but when compared to the state average, and again, when we take into account perspective of certain students, one student may feel disrespected, and that may not be the intent of the person who they think disrespected them. But I think that's definitely a nice score there.
Other comments? Concerns?
I got a question mark drawing from one of them, because I really have a hard time resonating a little bit with it. At least two of my academic, number 9, 2 of my classes, I'm allowed to work on assignments that personally interest me. And it's like, I struggle with this, like, we have required courses that we have to take because of, that's the rules.
Especially 9th and 10th grade. 9th and 10th grade is really core requirements. Electives
Well, I
don't
mean,
really
how many
electives don't open
4-year
up.
requirements do we have now
Yeah.
from the state? in
More and
terms
more.
of,
Yeah.
things there. So, a lot of that stuff is, it's like,
It's
It's-
systemic. It's,
Yeah,
we're trying,
it's
Yeah.
not all about choice. We have to do certain things, so I don't necessarily
Whether it's a
resonate well
passion
with that question.
project, or, we're looking to address that certainly through some project-based learning. We're talking about that, I think I mentioned that in the previous meeting, about the relevance of the learning and the ability to pursue side interests, whether, Jason sort of spoke to it too, I think how we could do it, and he was answering a different item, a different question, but I think within a unit, providing opportunities to have, for students to have choice, to do something related, that's related to standards, but is how they go about presenting on it or show their learning, choosing an assessment on a particular project, and also pursuing a topic of interest. We see more of that opening up in junior and senior year. We're talking about bringing back some form of a senior project now. There were a lot of observations made out of our community read of Most Likely to Succeed book, and viewing the documentary about High Tech High and some of the innovative things they're doing and how we can appeal to student interest. There's lots of schools around the country modeling this for us, and we can learn from them. So I think as a faculty, we need to discuss how we can constantly make connections to what students are learning, to make it meaningful and to make it as much as we can to a teenager, to see the connection to what they're learning in high school to either college, career, citizenship. Those are the 3 C's we talk about a lot. But really trying to bring home an opportunity for students to study something of interest. It is happening in the building. We have to start to collect, I think, evidence of that, as to where it's happening, and then try to have teachers present some exemplars of what they've done to other faculty members, so we can have evidence of it in every department. But that's something that resonated with me. I'd like to do more of it, even in a standards-based environment that has lots of state requirements.
Yeah, no, I have a line drawn down to number 11 and the 40% that said that they don't have an opportunity to do more challenging work.
We were puzzled by that. In the last one,
It's in conflict,
Yeah, And how do they exactly, interpret the question too? When I
I'm
finished
not
my-
interested in it, and I don't want to be challenged by it.
Well,
I'm not sure how to relate to the
Students
answer
finish
to
their
that.
work early if they're in elementary or middle school, and they might be given something additional to do because they complete something at a rapid rate. Is it that kind of interpretation? Or is it, I did my project early and now give me more work, I submitted it early? I think that's a difficult question for us to even answer.
Yeah, no, that's what I mean.
So I don't know, I think the kids probably put down what they filled in the bubble, as you mentioned.
We do have more flexibility in high school than at times we realize, because after our students have finished their grade 10 MCAS, unless you take an AP course, you really don't have any standardized exams to write after that. And John and I have had many conversations that those are prime times to start looking at diversifying pathways for students so that they can explore many different things.
We're going to see growth of that in the coming years, I think, with internships, work study, dual enrollment courses, the kids that appeal to students' interests.
And then, sorry to keep going on, but then 8, the 10% and the 19% in
Yep.
there, again, is almost in conflict with the discussion we had like about 5 minutes ago on tracks and making sure that the opportunities are
Oh, that's
available,
a-
but now we're not encouraging or,
Yeah.
that's,
That's an honest answer. At that point in time, when they took this survey, their 10th grade, they're not in AP courses. They weren't encouraged to be in AP courses in 10th grade. We only have really one course that we open up, and and it's not currently running at the high school, which was an AP World History course, where we had allowed sophomores a few years ago to take that. And that's in line with what the College Board recommends. Our AP courses are pretty much reserved for juniors and seniors. They're often quite full, and there's all kinds of prerequisites, really, in cumulative skills that students have to have when they step into that. So that's an honest answer. That really is not too surprising. We put a strong emphasis, I think, in all the departments, particularly when we have a course selection night with 8th grade parents, to make sure that parents really take, and students think carefully about their course selections for upper level courses at the high school. There are students, we want to promote challenge, we don't want to get in the way of that. We do have an override process where parents can override a college prep placement or recommendation by a teacher.
But there are definitely those hard conversations that happen sometimes with teachers when they're going through the scheduling process with the 9th grade going to 10th grade. I'm just trying to recognize what these kids have, maybe have experienced, because they're in 10th grade. So they haven't gone through this process that often with the teacher at the high school. And when they're going through it from 9th to 10th grade, yeah, that teacher might circle, I think you should be in the college prep course based on what I've seen and experienced, with you in the past year. So I don't know if that addresses that a little bit. I'm encouraged. It doesn't say who's encouraging them. Presumably it's the school and the teachers. So I think overall, I think there were a lot of 90s and 80s and upper percentiles there. We could see that there was a lot of positive results with engagement for the school.
As the unrelated comment is when I was on Neshoba Tech, which has 6 different feeder schools for it, with multiple districts within each one of them. They wrestle with the same thing here, is by 9th grade, they're figuring out who these kids are, what their background was, and 10th grade is they're being tested on it. And it's not just one school district that they're getting all of their students from. So we have it easy.
Easier.
I think when we look at, certainly it's probably true for all the other schools, but when we look at MCAS testing at the high school, it's an untimed test. Kids have spent a fair amount of time on the test, and then they've been given this survey with very little, this is an optional test. There was no directions. I have to go back and look at, I want to look at this next time. Sometimes there's a protocol to follow or a series of directions to follow when you administer a survey.
Right.
And, and there's an opportunity to discuss maybe clarification with the teacher. That very likely, I'd have to go back and ask. I don't think that happened with this survey administration. I think this was a piece of paper that students, once you finish the test, were handed to with very little guidance or anything at all, just fill in the, and thank you all collected on your way out like an exit ticket. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we start to get very granular about examining, the results.
Anything else on engagement?
Not really. The only thing I would say is we talk about choice again, it's come up across the 3 schools, is that the thing that keeps coming to mind to me is like the Blizzard bags, that we spent a whole lot of time talking about how we were set on making sure that there was student choice in them, and that, and so clearly we all recognize that that's important,
yes.
Right? And that, and there are some ways that it can be done, and so, maybe just taking some of those ideas that, you work so hard on and bringing some of them into the regular school year.
Some reflection and mindset
Right.
changes. That's what we're hoping as well. That was a great opportunity for our staff to actually get together and work on projects that actually encourage choice.
Right.
So we're encouraging. I'll leave it at that word right now. That this becomes more commonplace in all grades.
Safety?
Back down the line.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, with 13, the first one, it's a great number that kids feel that teachers will help them, which is always wonderful to see. The thing that stood out for me, again, I keep saying it, but the I statements stand out the most for me. So the I stayed at home because I didn't feel safe. I have been, this one really stood out. I have been teased or picked on more than once because of my race or ethnicity. Now, that's a very small number, but we also have a very small population of minorities. So, you know, that just, I mean, what is our minority population?
Have to look at that.
Fairly
really
small.
well. Yeah.
It's like, isn't it like 14%, 13, 14%?
It's probably less.
And 7% are saying that they've been teased or picked on.
It doesn't-
know.
Yeah, it doesn't specify.
So that just stood out for me.
Mhm.
The other thing that I thought was interesting, was that teachers, student 16, teachers, students, and the principal work together to prevent bullying. Now, most people, 86% said, yes, they do that. So there was like 14% that didn't, so that's, similar to the 13% that stayed home because they didn't feel safe. So I'm just wondering if there's some kind of correlation between, most of our kids feel safe. Most of our kids are doing really well and happy to be at school and have friends, but for that small amount of kids who aren't, are those the same kids that don't feel like they have anyone to go to, and they don't feel like they have anyone who is going to stop it,
Can you remember what that percentage was on the micro survey?
On the what?
The micro survey that we did this year? For high school?
No, I have to pull up bowling. Yeah,
It was
that's
under 10 still.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. It really is. We can certainly spend some time teasing out.
Yeah, well, what do they, that would be something to explore. What do they mean? Is it about students' involvement? Because it's teachers and the principals are definitely working together on it.
Right.
To what extent are
And
students involved?
part of
I
that
think that's
is
my
they
initial-
might not see,
Yeah.
right, what goes on behind the scenes, and they don't know
Yeah.
that you're doing all this stuff to prevent it,
And
right?
and it could be an implication of enough, like there's not enough being done.
Right.
That's how I'm answering the question. I don't think any student would assume that nothing's being done,
Right. Work together.
But it's a
Right, but
question
if
of, are you
there's
doing enough,
13%.
or are you being effective enough?
I was just hit by the similarities.
Right, no, that's what I mean.
So if there's
Right, there's
13%
that don't feel like you're doing enough, and I'm gonna stay home.
I'm
That's
not
worrisome.
feeling good.
Right.
So.
And we
Right.
talked about the 26 there, that, because that was something I wanted to, that struck us too, even though, it's a smaller percentage, but it's close to the state, right? And that's something we sometimes, it can be an identified area of concern to look deeper into and address. And anytime you have even 8, 9 students, based on the percentage there, reporting that they stayed home in terms of a raw number, if we would look at, I wonder who those students are in the sophomore class and why. What were the reasons? What was their feeling of safety? Is it something to do with anxiety, school avoidance? I mentioned that at the last meeting. Because there's what is it, is it because they feel threatened at school because someone's going to hurt them or insult them or bully them? We have to look into that and make sure, that's not something we want to have. We want that to be zero. But we do know, I know their names. I know there are students in every grade level who've had attendance issues related to anxiety around school, this school avoidance behavior. Some of them times it's, though, I've stayed at home or avoid school because I did not feel safe in my school because they're having some type of health issue. Is that their interpretation of it? Certainly our minds immediately go with the negativity bias to think about that they're feeling that they might be hurt at school in some way or not feel included. And that's my big concern here, so we're going to look deeper into that.
Oh, with the addition of our counselor as well, therapeutic counselor,
Mhm.
hope that will be having a positive impact
Yeah.
on some of the students.
Generally,
I use the word hope,
yeah.
but I need to use a stronger word. We see the difference.
Right. Well, was it Michelle, I think last time, who said that she looked at the numbers of kids who are being seen by the counselor, and that was
Yeah.
nice to see that there seemed, less kids, although that's not what I see in general in the world. It seems like there are more problems and more, but if, it seems like what you're doing in terms of SEL is making a difference in the amount of kids who need support, then,
Anything else, Stacy? All right, so environment.
I would just say the same thing as the unhealthy, the pressure to perform is unhealthy, it goes back to the stress that we all know is an issue out there, but,
We've seen that, the pressure to perform, the stress about grades, and other survey data focus groups. So that's something we're actively working on as we develop an action plan for next year and some specific steps to the extent we can control it. We're going to try to do our best to mitigate the pressure that students, some of it's self-imposed, some of it's, it's from their family background, or, the family's pressures. But a lot of our kids put a lot of pressure on themselves. And it's not, I wouldn't say it comes from parental pressure. And even, to the point where parents are reaching out to us to try to talk to us for ideas on how to get the kids back off on feeling so much pressure to perform and be so concerned about their grades. So that's something we're actively working on. And that data, it correlates with other findings. So not surprising.
and to Darrell's point about some of the questions being contradictory to each other, right, is going back to engagement, I am encouraged to take upper level courses, AP, like, is that something we really need to be pushing on kids? And, if they're ready, or if they're not, they're not, right? But I feel like, the state, the Board of Education has some contradictory ideas about what is best for kids, and I think that probably we do too as a school. Like, we're saying, oh, don't worry about it, but you need to get this grade, or don't worry about it, but if you don't, you can't get into this. So, I think we just need to watch ourselves when we're in the messages we're sending to kids.
I mean, workload balance is something we talk about all the time.
Right.
All schools are wrestling with this high-achieving, high-performing school districts with lots of high expectations. People choosing to live in Littleton, we're talking more about that, I think, as a community, because of the high standards and high expectations, the outcomes. But I think I actually wrote down Mike's phrase, because I think it's something we need to reiterate with the staff, is to focus on process and less so on outcomes. And some of that has to do with retakes and how we really need to examine our assessment and grading practices and how we reinforce it, growth mindset, process, and not just the result. Teach it, I taught it, you didn't learn it, we're moving on. No, I taught it, you didn't learn it, what are we going to do now? And make an adjustment. I think that's something we need to talk about. I think both Cheryl and Jason talked about the strong emphasis on executive skills. I've been a strong advocate about that. We've done extensive professional development on that at certainly the whole district. And I think in the years ahead, we'll see the high school students be the beneficiaries of that in terms of how they manage their time and try to balance things. That's an area of continued emphasis for us. And I also think we've done a lot of work with anxiety and stress. We've had a number of professional speakers and professional development on that. We've featured that each year at the school committee. So the fact that the data is showing us something that we've been working on, it's reinforcing some things we already kind of knew and we have been actively working on. But we'd like to start to see some of the survey data show some results for us that we've been really emphasizing a lot of with staff and with students about managing the stress and the time. The other thing I would mention, though, and I think hopefully this will, we'll see the results of this in a real positive way with focus groups and follow-up surveys, is a strong district emphasis on social emotional learning. It's statewide, it's everywhere, everybody's talking about, every principal, everybody's engaged in this effort. And how do we reach out and make it a real community effort, not just school-based, is going to be the future of where the next level of SEL is making the home-school connection. So I just wanted to chime in on that, because there's a lot of things already underway, and we'll summarize that for you for a future presentation. I think in many ways, Littleton's leading the way, because it's ahead of the curve. There are some districts that have been talking about student stress east of us, for a while. I remember I think it was a principal in Needham High School about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now, we started talking about a stress reduction task force, because he was picking up on it. He was really leading the effort there, and now it's just pervasive.
Comments on the waiver?
Yeah, I'd just say, again, I'll just hit 33, 34, 35. I think it's the, not necessarily saying it's not happening, I think it's whether it's seen as being effective or not on the receiver's end. And then that might just be something to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. 34 surprised us, but we're going to look why the students perceive that, and we'll try to look deeper into that.
Yeah, that was all that I had.
I'm good.
Closing comments, Dr. Cloutier?
Thanks, it was a great conversation. I'm really glad we set aside a separate meeting.
What I like to say is that some of this we talked about, but I appreciate some of what we heard. You guys are already doing other surveys and focus groups around this type of thing, because I personally feel this thing is flawed. There was a lack of preparation for you guys to get it and see it and know what was coming down the line. There was a lack of preparation when it was developed. We, being school committees and administrations, had no input that we think we had. I think giving it at the end of the MCAS is ridiculous. It's going to skew it. And it's 3 grades. It's only 3 grades, It's like, and maybe 5th grade, I don't even know if I would even ask questions like that to a 5th grader, to be honest with you, in a survey format. I might want to try to elicit the information, but I don't think a survey is necessarily the right way to do it for kids that age. And what I want to make sure, and what I think I see happening is that in the same manner that, yes, we take the MCAS seriously, we prepare for it, and we analyze the data, but that's not our jumping off point in Littleton by any stretch of the imagination. We have better jumping off points for making sure that we're getting done what we want to get done the way we want to do it in Littleton. And when we think about something like this, I want the same message to go across. Don't focus on this, keep going in the direction. Now, what I would say is that if we can see quantified data in baselines and measuring across time and being presented with that information, that would be great, and focus groups are important, but that becomes somewhat more subjective than objective. So trying to strike that balance and allowing the school committee to be able to review that with you guys on an annual basis or a semi-annual, but whatever we think is appropriate, similar to the way we do the MAP assessments and other things like that, I would feel like, we have a sense of what's going on, but then we would be able to have an actual concrete, definable, something we can communicate back to, parents and constituents and other things like that. I think that's what we should be driving for. I know a lot of this is new, like the MCAS idea of testing and baselining in the MAP assessments, academic material. Well, that's what we do every day. And the SEL stuff is something that's been more soft, let's say, in the way we've done it. Now we're trying to make it a little hard, right, exactly, quantifiable. So I think we got a ways to go, but if we're driving towards that, I think we'll be in great shape. And, I wouldn't dismiss this out of hand, but I wouldn't want us to be hanging our hat on this one. I want us to do our own thing, because I think we can do a better job.
And what we've done with the YARDA survey this year, for years and years, we would take a broad brush and have 12 or 13 initiatives, and we're still looking at all of the areas we want to keep moving forward with. But what we did differently this year is took a look at what are 2 areas that are a real priority for us. and let's do a deep dive. And if we keep doing that every year, I believe, and the administrative team believes, that we'll make a greater difference, we'll have a greater impact on what we're trying to do in terms of supporting students in those areas. Doesn't mean we're not going to address those other areas, but I think giving more attention to the top two that rise to that we feel we really need to inject some time and energy and resources, I think will give us better results through time as well.
You all right? I appreciate everybody making time for this particular meeting. I think it was worthwhile. I think the material was worthwhile, and I think we wouldn't have been able to do as good a job without doing it this program. So appreciate everybody carving their time out.
Thank you.
Enjoy April vacation, and we'll come back after that. All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. Motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you.